Part 2. The next few days felt surreal. We had left Loch Ness behind, but it stayed with me, like an echo I couldn't shake. I couldn't stop thinking about the massive shadow beneath the water, the sense of being watched, even if I knew it was over. At least, that's what I tried to tell myself. I spent hours replaying the footage in my mind, but no matter how many times I watched it, I couldn't find a logical explanation for what we had seen. It wasn't a trick of the light or some local folklore brought to life. That creature was real, and no one we spoke to seemed willing to acknowledge that fact. Paul hadn't said much since the trip. His silence was like a heavy weight between us, his mind no doubt occupied by the same questions. "Do you think we should have told them everything?" I asked one evening, sitting next to Paul in the quiet of our apartment. "I don't know. They didn't seem to take us seriously." He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "I guess it doesn't matter. We saw it. That's enough for me." I nodded. I agreed with him. The truth was, we didn't need validation from anyone. We knew what we had seen, and that was enough to make me never want to return to that place again. Over the next week, things started to settle into a routine again. We went back to work, tried to push the memory of Loch Ness to the back of our minds. But I couldn't help but feel a lingering unease. It wasn't just the creature. It was the feeling that there was something more, something we hadn't fully understood. One evening, I received a message from Philip. It was short, but the words were enough to stir up the dread I thought I had left behind. "Heading back to Loch Ness. I need to find out more." I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart racing. I had to talk to him. I couldn't let him go back there alone. I immediately called him, the phone ringing several times before he picked up. "Philip, are you serious?" I asked, my voice tight with concern. "You're thinking of going back? After everything we saw?" "I can't just leave it like this," Philip said, his tone flat. "I need to understand what happened. We all do." "Don't be crazy," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We saw something out there, something we couldn't explain. It's not something we should mess with." "I'm not going alone," he said, and I could hear the determination in his voice. "Paul's coming with me, and you should too." I knew then I couldn't talk him out of it. He was going back, whether I joined him or not, but I couldn't let him go without me. "I'll go with you," I said. "But we have to be careful. Whatever's out there, we don't know what we're dealing with." Philip didn't respond immediately. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "I just need to know, all right?" he finally said. "I need to know what we saw." I hung up the phone, my stomach in knots. This was going to be a bad idea. I just knew it. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the pull, the need to understand, to see if there was more to the story than what we had witnessed. The decision was made. We were going back. And this time, there would be no turning back. The decision to return to Loch Ness wasn't one we made lightly. As researchers sent by the government, we had a responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to those who had sent us out there in the first place. The higher-ups had tasked us with investigating the anomalies around Loch Ness, and although they hadn't specifically requested a deep dive into anything related to cryptids, we had collected enough data to warrant further study. But we knew the risks. Whatever it was that lurked in the depths of that lake, it wasn't something easily explained. We were supposed to be studying the ecosystem, the geology, maybe even the water quality. We weren't supposed to be chasing down shadows beneath the surface. And yet, here we were, preparing to return. It felt like a violation of our purpose, something that no report or scientific paper would ever truly explain. But it wasn't just about data anymore. There was something we needed to understand. I called our contact at the government office, a man named Gregor, who had been in charge of our project from the beginning. He had known about our reports and seemed unnervingly unconcerned about what we had found. "Gregor, we need to go back to Loch Ness," I said, my voice firm. "There's more going on there than we can explain, and I need more time to collect data. It's not just the lake. There's something alive in it, something that needs further investigation." There was a long pause on the other end. "I read your report?" Gregor finally said. His tone was professional, but there was an undercurrent of impatience. "I'll be honest with you. We're not interested in cryptids or legends. We sent you there to gather real, verifiable data. Your team needs to focus on the project. If you're chasing shadows, we won't be funding any more of your work. His words hit harder than I expected. But Gregor, this isn't just a shadow. It's something we can't explain. We need to figure out what it is, or at least gather more evidence. You can't just dismiss it. Focus on the data, Gregor said curtly. You've got your work cut out for you. I don't care what you think you saw. If you want to stay funded, you stick to the objectives. Understand? I stood there for a moment, staring at my phone, feeling the weight of his words. It was clear that our research wasn't going to take the direction we'd hoped for. The government wasn't interested in the unknowns, only the certainties. And what we had seen at Loch Ness was anything but certain. But we couldn't let it go. I understand, I said, despite the frustration welling up inside me. We'll stick to the project. But we'll need more time. With a stiff nod, I ended the call. We had to follow the official guidelines, but we knew our priorities. The next day, we met up to finalize our plans. Paul and Philip had already started going over their notes, trying to piece together any new theories, any way they could explain the phenomenon. They, too, were caught between the line of government orders and their own curiosity. We can't just let this go, Paul said, as we gathered around the table. We need to finish the mission, but we also need to understand what we're dealing with. I agree, Philip added. If the government's not going to help, then it's on us. We need to gather as much data as possible, even if it means going off the radar a bit. We'll stick to the plan, I said, though my voice felt hollow. But we'll take extra precautions. We document everything, no matter what. And so, we packed up once again. We headed back to Loch Ness, our mission clear in the eyes of those who had sent us. But in our hearts, we knew there was more to discover. More than we could write in reports or send as data points. We were going back to solve a mystery, and maybe, just maybe, find something that would shake the very foundations of what we thought we knew about Loch Ness. This wasn't just about data anymore. It was personal. As we neared Loch Ness, a familiar tension hung in the air. The landscape, once so serene and beautiful, now felt foreboding. The mist that rolled over the lake seemed thicker, almost purposeful, as though it were hiding something that was watching. I could feel it, even if I couldn't explain it. We set up our equipment at the same location where we had gathered before, the same spot we had filmed the shadows in the water. It felt wrong to return, but at the same time, I knew we had no choice. We were bound to our objective: gather data, observe, and report. The government's directive still echoed in my mind, its cold practicality sinking deeper with every passing hour. The problem was, they didn't understand what we had seen. They didn't understand what we had experienced. Paul and Philip went to work setting up the sonar devices and monitoring equipment, while I took a moment to process everything. There was something unnerving about the silence of Loch Ness. No birds chirped, no leaves rustled, just the soft lapping of water against the shore, like it was waiting for something to happen. As I glanced over at Paul, I saw that his expression mirrored mine. Unease. He caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was as if he was telling me, "We're doing the right thing." But were we? Were we really? Philip stood a bit off to the side, studying the water, his face a mask of concentration. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something we didn't fully understand. I had seen it in his eyes back at the apartment, the curiosity that outweighed any fear. He was just as determined as I was to uncover the truth, but I feared it was more than we were prepared for. "We're good to go," Paul said, finally breaking the silence. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over to where I was standing. "Everything's set up. Let's just see what we can find. Keep your eyes on the data, but if you see anything out of the ordinary, anything, don't hesitate to say something." I nodded, the weight of our mission heavy on my chest. "Agreed?" We all took our positions, staring at our respective monitors, waiting for something, anything, to indicate that there was more to this lake than what we had originally believed. The hours dragged on, the monotony of watching graphs and readouts eating away at the initial excitement we had felt on our first trip. The lake was still, almost too still, and there was a sinking feeling in my stomach that I couldn't shake. Something was wrong. I couldn't tell if it was the atmosphere or something deeper, but I was starting to feel that same presence I had felt before. And then, Something changed. The sonar equipment let out a sharp beep, and the radar screen flickered. We all froze, staring at the screen, as a large, shadowy figure began to take shape beneath the water's surface. "It's back," Philip whispered. I could barely breathe as the figure grew larger, moving steadily through the water. The image wasn't clear, but it was unmistakable. It was too large to be any normal animal. The size alone, whatever it was, couldn't be explained away. "It's definitely not a boat," Paul said, his voice tight with disbelief. "That's moving too steadily. It's not anything we've seen before." I felt a chill race up my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. We had to approach this like professionals. We had to gather evidence. We focused all our attention on the sonar, tracking the figure's movements. The shadow was making its way deeper into the lake, retreating farther from our point of observation. Suddenly, the figure stopped moving. For several moments, there was nothing, just the quiet hum of our equipment. We stared at the screen, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then it hit us. An enormous wave surged towards us from the center of the lake, rocking the boat and sending water splashing over the sides. We scrambled to secure ourselves, but the force was almost too strong. The figure had surfaced. We couldn't see it clearly, but we all knew it was real. The Loch Ness Monster was real. And we were no longer just observers. We were part of something that was far beyond our understanding. The water calmed just as quickly as it had risen, and we sat in stunned silence, processing what we had just witnessed. "What the hell was that?" Paul breathed, still gripping the edge of the boat. "I don't know," Philip muttered, "but we can't leave without knowing more." I didn't know if I was more terrified or excited. This was what we had come for, proof. But now that we had it, I couldn't help but wonder if it was a curse rather than a discovery. We were about to learn just how dangerous this research could get. The air felt thicker now. As we recovered from the shock of what we'd just witnessed, we knew we had crossed a line. The Loch Ness Monster, if that's what it was, had revealed itself to us, or at least part of it had. And in that instant, everything shifted. We had come here to gather data, to explain the unexplainable. But what if there were no explanations? What if we were dealing with something far beyond our understanding? Our boat rocked gently in the aftermath of the wave, the water lapping against the sides as the sonar screen flickered. We had stopped recording the creature's movements, but it was clear that the lake was far from normal. "It can't just be a fish," I said, breaking the silence. My voice trembled, but I couldn't help it. Whatever that was, it's too large. It's not any known species. Paul stared at the water, his eyes scanning the surface as if he might see another ripple or sign of movement. "It's not a fish. It's not anything we know, but it's definitely alive." The sonar picked it up, and that wasn't just some distortion. Philip was pacing now, his fingers running over his notebook. "I know it sounds insane, but this has to be it. This has to be the Loch Ness Monster. There's no other way to explain it. It's the only logical conclusion." But as much as I wanted to believe that, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. We had seen something, but was it truly the monster? Or had we caught a glimpse of something else entirely? Something darker? "We need to document everything," I said firmly. "We're here for a reason, and we can't leave until we have full confirmation." "I don't care what it takes." The three of us nodded in agreement, each of us knowing the risks involved. We had to gather as much evidence as possible, or else the reports we sent back wouldn't have the weight they needed. We had been sent here by the government, after all, and they wouldn't accept anything less than hard data. "We need to set up some cameras on the shore," Paul suggested. "If it comes near the surface again, we need to be ready. We'll document it from all angles. We can't afford to miss anything." We worked through the evening, setting up the cameras and fine-tuning our sonar equipment. It felt surreal, knowing we were preparing for a second encounter with something so enigmatic, something that had eluded humanity for centuries. As dusk fell, the lake grew eerily quiet once more. There were no more waves, no more ripples. The surface of the water became almost impossibly still, as though whatever had caused the disturbance was now hiding. "Do you think it's still here?" Philip asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that something was out there. Something we weren't supposed to see. Something that had crossed into our reality. and it wasn't leaving quietly. Hours passed, and the tension in the air only grew. Every flicker of movement on the water, every shift in the air felt like a sign. But nothing came. It was as if the creature had disappeared back into the depths, leaving us with nothing but our unease. Just as we were about to give up and pack up for the night, the sonar suddenly came to life again. A blip, then another. It wasn't the same as before, but it was unmistakable. "There!" I shouted, pointing to the screen. "It's moving again." This time, we were ready. The cameras were positioned on the shore, the sonar was set to track, and we had a clear view of the lake. But there was something different about this moment. It felt like we were being watched. We stared at the water, waiting. Time seemed to slow. The anticipation hung heavy in the air. And then, through the murky depths, we saw it. A massive shadow, rising slowly from the bottom of the lake. It was immense, and for a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, this was real. We were seeing it again. And this time, we had the evidence. I grabbed my camera and began filming, capturing every movement as the shadow drew nearer to the surface. The sonar readouts confirmed it. The creature was real, and it was bigger than anything we could have imagined. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow sank back into the depths. The water settled once more, as if the creature had never been there at all. "We got it," Paul breathed, staring at the screen in disbelief. But as I looked at the footage, a chill ran down my spine. Something about the way it moved, how it had appeared and then disappeared so quickly, left me unsettled. "We have enough evidence now," I said, my voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at me. "We have to go back and report what we've found." We spent the rest of the night reviewing the footage, analyzing the sonar data. But as we did, a thought kept creeping into my mind. What if this wasn't the end? What if there was more to this than just the creature in the lake? We had uncovered a mystery, but we had only scratched the surface. And whatever we had seen at Loch Ness, it wasn't just a monster. It was a warning. As we sat there in stunned silence, reviewing the footage once again, the hum of the radio broke the stillness. It was the government station, coming through on the secure frequency we had been assigned. I felt my heart race in anticipation as I grabbed the receiver. "Hello?" I spoke into the mic, trying to sound as calm as possible despite the unease that gripped me. There was a pause, followed by the unmistakable crackle of static. A deep, authoritative voice came through, but it was different from the usual contact we had received. This voice sounded polished, almost too controlled. It was clear that this person wasn't someone we'd dealt with before. "Mr. Evans?" the voice asked, using my full name with a level of formality that felt distant. "This is Officer Taylor from the Ministry of National Security. We've reviewed your latest transmissions. I must say, the data you've gathered is quite intriguing." My eyes darted to Paul and Philip, who were listening intently. We had expected to hear back from the usual contacts, but this man was different. His tone was almost cold, devoid of the usual interest or excitement we had encountered before. He was focused, precise. "Thank you, Officer Taylor," I replied cautiously, trying to gauge the situation. "We've been collecting data, but I must admit what we saw, it's difficult to process." "I understand," Officer Taylor replied smoothly, his voice unwavering. "That's why we need you to continue your observations. You've done well so far. Your professionalism is impressive, and the footage you've captured is exactly what we need." I glanced at Paul and Philip. There was something unsettling about the way he spoke, like he was more interested in the creature itself than our well-being. It was as if we were simply tools in a much larger puzzle. "Of course," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're prepared to continue, but is there any additional information you can provide about what we're looking for? We've already encountered the creature. What comes next?" There was another brief pause, as if the officer on the other end was considering how to respond. Finally, his voice cut through the static again, but this time it was even more detached. "Just keep observing," he said. "Continue your research, keep your equipment running, and monitor any changes in the lake. We need more data on its behavior. And please, do not attempt to make contact. Simply observe and report. This is critical." The message was clear, but the implications were much heavier. We were part of something bigger than we had anticipated. something that didn't care about the personal toll it was taking on us. We were expendable. Understood, I said, my voice betraying none of the uncertainty I felt. We'll continue with the observation and report any significant findings. Good, Officer Taylor replied. Your professionalism is crucial. We'll be in touch if there are further developments. Stay sharp. The line went dead with a sharp click, and we were left staring at the radio in silence. That was strange, Paul muttered, shaking his head. Yeah, Philip added. He seemed way more interested in our data than in what we actually saw. It's almost like he knew we were going to find something. I rubbed my forehead, a headache starting to form. This isn't just about Loch Ness, is it? There's more going on here. Something bigger. We're not even sure what we're really dealing with, Paul said, his voice low. But I'm starting to think this is more than just research. It feels like we're part of something else entirely. I agree, I replied, my mind racing. But we have to keep going. Whatever this is, we've crossed a line. We need to find out what it is, what we've gotten ourselves into. As we went back to reviewing the footage and preparing for the next stage of our research, one thing became clear. We weren't just studying a creature. We were being monitored and perhaps manipulated by forces far beyond our control. And the government, whatever its true intentions were, wanted us to continue. It was a chilling realization. We were no longer just observers of Loch Ness. We were pawns in a much larger game. The next morning, we resumed our observations with a growing sense of unease. The tension from the conversation with Officer Taylor still lingered in the air, a constant reminder that we were now involved in something far more significant and potentially dangerous than we had initially thought. The sonar equipment hummed quietly in the background as we scanned the water once again. The calm surface of Loch Ness, which had seemed so serene just days ago, now felt more like an unsettling, waiting void. The creature, or whatever it was, could be lurking beneath it, and we were here, watching, studying it, following orders we didn't fully understand. We spent hours on the water, but there was no sign of the creature. The lake felt as still as ever. However, the equipment continued to pick up faint readings. Something was there, moving deep below the surface. We weren't imagining things, but whatever was down there was more elusive than ever. I glanced over at Paul and Philip. The frustration on their faces mirrored my own. We had come so close before, but now we were struggling to make any significant progress. The government wanted results, but how could we provide them when the subject of our research seemed to be evading us? Should we try another spot? Paul asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Maybe it's moved to a different part of the lake. I nodded, but deep down, I didn't think it would make a difference. The creature, if it was even the creature we thought it was, didn't seem to be following any patterns we could predict. Suddenly, as if on cue, the sonar pinged loudly, snapping me out of my thoughts. The signal was stronger this time, clearer. Whatever was down there was close, moving in a predictable direction. There, I said quickly. It's close. We need to get to that area. We maneuvered the boat toward the coordinates, heartbeats quickening with every moment that passed. The water around us seemed to ripple faintly, but not in the way we had seen before. It wasn't the massive waves that had shaken our boat just days earlier. It was something more subtle, like the lake itself was breathing, shifting beneath our feet. We're right on top of it, Philip said, his voice tense as he glanced at the sonar screen. I took a deep breath, my grip tightening on the controls of the boat. Keep the cameras ready. We might get something. We waited in silence, watching the water, watching the sonar, and then a faint shadow appeared beneath the surface. It was difficult to make out at first, but it was unmistakable. A long, serpentine shape moving slowly, methodically through the murky water. There it is, Paul shouted, pointing toward the shadow. It's huge. The creature moved just beneath the surface, the outline of its body briefly visible through the water. It was as large and as long as we had feared, its form twisting and turning as it made its way across the lake. We could see it clearly now, despite the murkiness of the water. The shape was unmistakable. I grabbed the camera and started filming, capturing every movement. This was the moment we had been waiting for, the undeniable proof that Loch Ness was home to something extraordinary. But as the creature continued to swim beneath us, the eeriest thing happened. The water around the boat began to churn. Not violently, but with a sense of purpose, as though the creature was drawing closer to the surface. The sonar spikes went crazy, indicating rapid movement below. "We need to be careful," I said, my voice low. "It might come closer to the surface. We don't know how it will react." We were still filming when the creature did something unexpected. It stopped right beneath the boat. For several seconds, everything was still. There was no movement, no ripple in the water. It was as if the creature was simply waiting, watching us, evaluating us. I could feel the tension building in the air, thickening with every passing second. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't just some animal. This was something far more intelligent, something aware of its surroundings, aware of us. Then, without warning, the sonar went wild again. The creature darted off in the opposite direction, leaving the water calm once more. "What the hell just happened?" Philip whispered, his voice barely audible. I felt a chill run down my spine. I don't know, but it was like it knew we were here, knew we were watching it. We sat in stunned silence, the boat slowly drifting as we processed what we had just witnessed. We had been so close to capturing something truly groundbreaking. But now, as we reviewed the footage, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, that whatever this creature was, it wasn't done with us yet. And as the day wore on, we found ourselves not only chasing the Loch Ness Monster, but something far darker. The realization that we might be a part of a much larger and more dangerous game. The evening settled in over Loch Ness, and the air in our small weathered cabin grew colder as the day drew to a close. The small fire crackling in the corner did little to warm the room, but it offered a soft light as we gathered around the table, piles of notebooks and equipment scattered across the worn wooden surface. We had just witnessed something extraordinary out on the lake, and now it was time to document every single detail, despite the overwhelming exhaustion weighing on us. The footage we had captured, although not as clear as we would have liked, was invaluable. Whatever we had filmed was unmistakable, something massive, something alive, and something we couldn't explain. We had been sent by the government to study Loch Ness, and we had captured something no one else had ever seen. But there was no time to rest on our laurels. This was only the beginning. "Let's go through everything carefully," I said, my voice hoarse from hours of tension. "We have to be precise with every detail. This could change everything, but only if we can prove it." Paul had already laid out his notes, a pencil in hand, scribbling furiously on the small pad of paper that had become our lifeline. There were no computers here, just the old-fashioned tools of the trade, notebooks, maps, and the rudimentary equipment we had brought along. We had set up a series of hand-drawn sketches of the lake, documenting our observations with as much precision as we could muster. It felt like we were living in the past, with nothing but ink and paper to work with, but we had no other choice. Philip, sitting across from me, was diligently making notes in his journal, tracking the exact time and coordinates of every sighting we had. The lake seemed as silent as ever, but our minds were buzzing with thoughts of the creature. The creature. Loch Ness's very own enigma. I glanced over at Paul, whose face was pale in the dim light. "Do you think they already know everything we've seen?" I asked, voicing the unease that had been growing inside me since the moment we first spotted the shadow beneath the water. He paused for a moment, pencil still in hand. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I've got a feeling they've known about this for a long time. It's like they want us to collect data, not just prove the monster's real, but to make sure we're documenting everything, just the way they want." Philip spoke up, his voice quiet but urgent. "What if this is more than just research? What if we're being used for something else? We've seen something out there that isn't just a legend. What if it's not just a creature they're after, but control?" His words made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I hadn't voiced those thoughts aloud either, but they had been creeping into my mind for days. The government's interest in Loch Ness wasn't just about science. It was more than that. We were in way over our heads, and the more we uncovered, the more dangerous it seemed. We worked late into the night, going over our sketches, rechecking the measurements, and cross-referencing the readings from the sonar equipment. We could only rely on our eyes, our memory, and our notes to piece together what had happened out on the lake. The footage was shaky and imperfect, but it was evidence. Proof that Loch Ness was not just a myth and that there was something, no, someone, living beneath the water. As I sat back in my chair and stared at the rough sketches we had made, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were documenting more than just a creature. We were documenting a secret, one that was being kept hidden from the world, something powerful, ancient, and untamed. And now, we were a part of it. The small room seemed to close in on us as we continued to work. The sound of the pen scratching against paper, the occasional shuffle of pages, it was all that could be heard, except for the creaking of the old wood in the cabin. After hours of painstaking work, I stopped, rubbing my eyes. "I think that's everything," I said. "We've documented what we saw, the best we could. Tomorrow, we'll head back to the government and report it." But as I looked at my companions, I knew that there was more to this than just another research report. We weren't just here to study the creature. We were part of something bigger, something far more dangerous than we could have ever imagined. I turned to Paul and Philip, the weight of what we were involved in heavy on my mind. "We can't go back, can we?" I muttered. Paul shook his head. "No, we're in this now. All we can do is follow through." I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I stared out the small window at the dark waters of Loch Ness. There was something out there, something we still didn't fully understand, and whatever it was waiting for us. The morning arrived slowly, with the faintest light creeping in through the small gaps in the cabin's wooden walls. The fire we had tended to the night before had long since died down, leaving the room cold and quiet. The air felt heavy, as if the land around Loch Ness itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to make our next move. We had spent the night documenting, writing, and reviewing everything we had seen. The footage was still running through my mind, the haunting shape that had emerged from the depths of the lake. The water had swallowed it whole as quickly as it had revealed it, leaving us with more questions than answers. As we packed our things, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The isolation of the cabin only seemed to amplify the unease. But we had a job to do. Our report had to be sent, and our observations needed to be shared. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't going to stay hidden forever. And the government was expecting results. We had to return to the station and report in. Paul stood up from the small table where he'd been going over his notes once more. "It's time," he said, his voice steady, but tinged with a hint of uncertainty. "We've got to report what we saw. But after that, who knows?" I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I just hope we can trust them to handle it properly. I don't want to end up as part of some bigger scheme." Philip, ever the skeptic, shook his head. "We're too deep in this now. They know. They've always known. We're just the ones who are finally getting the proof." The three of us left the cabin, locking the door behind us. The walk back to the station was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts, dreading the moment when we would have to hand over our findings. The beauty of Loch Ness seemed distant now, as if the very landscape held some hidden truth that we were not yet ready to understand. When we arrived at the station, the atmosphere felt different. The staff, who had been polite and distant when we first arrived, now seemed almost expectant, as if they were waiting for us to deliver the answers they were hoping for. There was no warmth in the air, no camaraderie, just the cold, sterile environment of a government operation. We approached the main desk, where a technician handed us the receiver for the direct line to headquarters. I couldn't help but notice how tense the air had become. There were no pleasantries this time, just business. Taking the receiver, I spoke into it, my voice steady but with a touch of apprehension. "This is the research team at Loch Ness. We've completed our observations." A different voice came through the line this time. Not the familiar tone of our usual contact, but someone else. A man with a deeper voice, controlled and somewhat unsettling. "I understand you've gathered some interesting footage," he said, his tone flat, as if he already knew everything we had seen. I exchanged a glance with Paul and Philip. The man was too calm, too collected. "Yes," I said carefully. "We have footage of the creature. It's clear we've encountered something significant." There was a pause on the other end, a moment of silence that stretched on too long. "Good," the voice finally said. "We expected as much. This is just the beginning. We'll need more data, more observations. Your work has been invaluable. I felt my stomach tighten. More data? I echoed. What are you asking for? The voice didn't hesitate. Continue observing the lake. Document any further activity. We'll be in contact again soon. You are professionals, and this information will be crucial. As the line went silent, I couldn't help but feel a sinking feeling in my chest. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't just about the creature anymore. They wanted something else, something more. And we were caught right in the middle of it. I turned to Paul and Philip, my mind racing with questions. What did we just get ourselves into? I asked quietly. Paul shook his head. I don't know, but we're not backing out now. Whatever it is, we have to finish this. And so, we did. We returned to the shore of Loch Ness, unsure of what we were supposed to be looking for, but certain that we were being watched. By the government, by something lurking in the depths, or perhaps by both. But we couldn't turn back now. We were in too deep. End of part 2.